It was one of those lazy golden afternoons in Los Angeles, the kind where the sun feels warm on your skin and the world seems to move just a little slower. People were out enjoying the day, some jogging along the park trails, others sitting under trees with books or coffee cups in hand. It was peaceful, almost perfect. In the middle of all this calm stood Jason Statham, Hollywood's well-known action star. But today he wasn't filming a movie or attending some glitzy event. He was just a regular guy spending time with his best friend, a scrappy little terrier mix named Max. Max wasn't anything fancy. He didn't have a pedigree or win any dog shows, but to Jason, he meant everything. That bond between them was real, raw, and unshakable. Jason loved these quiet moments, away from cameras and crowds. He lived for the simplicity of walking through the park, letting Max sniff around freely, chasing squirrels or rolling in patches of grass. For him, it was therapy, a chance to breathe easy and forget about the pressures of fame for a while. Max trotted ahead, his tail wagging like crazy as he explored every nook and cranny of the park. He stopped at bushes, sniffed lampposts, and even barked playfully at a butterfly fluttering past. Jason watched with a soft smile, leaning casually against a bench. His mind wandered as he soaked in the serenity of the moment. Life felt good, right then, but sometimes life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And on this particular afternoon, trouble came roaring into the picture, literally. A loud rumble pierced the air, growing louder by the second. Jason looked up to see a group of bikers pulling into the parking lot near the park. Their motorcycles thundered like beasts, drowning out the chirping birds and rustling leaves. The leader of the pack stepped off his bike first. He was big, built like a tank, with tattoos snaking up his arms and a leather vest covered in patches that hinted at a rough lifestyle. You could tell he wasn't the type to back down from a fight. His face carried a permanent scowl, and his eyes scanned the area like he owned the place. Behind him, his crew followed suit, laughing loudly and revving their engines for no reason other than to make noise. Something about them felt wrong. They weren't here for a casual ride or to enjoy the scenery. They were looking for trouble, and unfortunately for everyone else in the park, they seemed determined to find it. As the bikers settled near the picnic tables, lighting cigarettes and cracking jokes, Max wandered closer, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. He sniffed curiously around their parked bikes, his tail still wagging innocently. To Max, these strangers were just another part of the park. But to the bikers, especially their leader, this tiny dog was nothing more than an annoyance waiting to happen, and that's when things took a dark turn. This version expands on the setting, characters, and mood without using overly complicated language or violating any policies. Let me know if you'd like me to continue expanding the next parts. The leader of the biker gang, a burly man with arms like tree trunks and a sneer that could sour milk, stepped forward. He had an air of arrogance about him, the kind that made people cross the street to avoid crossing his path. His leather vest was covered in patches, symbols of loyalty to gangs, slogans that celebrated chaos, and designs that screamed danger. It wasn't hard to guess what kind of person he was. He glanced down, noticing Max sniffing around near the parked motorcycles. At first he didn't say anything. Maybe he thought the dog would lose interest and wander off. But Max, being the curious little terrier he was, kept poking around, tail wagging happily as if he owned the place. The biker's patience wore thin fast. "Hey," the man barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of the park. "Get lost, mutt." Max froze for a moment, ears perked up, before deciding to ignore him completely. Dogs, after all, don't understand threats. They go by instinct. And right now, Max's instincts told him there was nothing to fear here. The biker, on the other hand, clearly didn't share that sentiment. With a growl of frustration, the man stomped toward Max and kicked dirt in his direction. "I said scram, you flea-bitten runt," he yelled, louder this time. A few heads turned in the park, but most people looked away quickly. Confronting someone like him wasn't worth the risk. Jason, who had been watching from a distance, felt a pang of irritation. He knew Max well enough to know the dog wouldn't hurt anyone or cause trouble. All Max wanted was to explore, to enjoy, the freedom of the open space. But Jason also knew better than to jump into things recklessly. He took a deep breath, ready to step in calmly if needed. But then something happened that made Jason's blood run cold. Instead of backing off, the biker took another step toward Max. And before anyone could react, he raised his boot and delivered a brutal kick straight to the dog's side. Max yelped in pain and tumbled across the pavement, landing in a heap. The sound of the impact echoed through the park, silencing the chatter and laughter around them. The rest of the bikers burst into cruel laughter, cheering on their leader like it was some twisted game. "Nice one, boss," one of them shouted, high-fiving another. To them, this wasn't just about teaching a dog a lesson, it was entertainment. They fed off cruelty, thriving on the power they felt when they intimidated others. Jason stood frozen for half a second, his heart pounding in his chest. He stared at Max lying motionless on the ground and then at the biker, who wore a smug grin like he'd just won a prize. Anger bubbled inside Jason, hot and fierce, but he forced himself to stay calm. Acting impulsively wouldn't help Max, or anyone else in the park. Slowly, Jason began walking toward the scene. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists. Every step he took radiated purpose. People nearby whispered nervously, unsure of what was about to happen. Some recognized him immediately, that unmistakable face, those piercing eyes, and exchanged glances, wondering if this ordinary afternoon was about to turn extraordinary. When Jason reached Max, he knelt down gently, scooping the trembling dog into his arms. Max whimpered softly, his big brown eyes filled with confusion and pain. Jason ran his fingers over the dog's fur, checking for injuries. Thankfully, Max seemed more scared than seriously hurt, but the anger in Jason's chest didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. He looked up, locking eyes with the biker who had caused all this. The man smirked, clearly unbothered by Jason's presence. In fact, he seemed amused. "What? You got a problem?" he taunted, puffing out his chest like a peacock showing off its feathers. Jason didn't say a word. Not yet. He simply stood, up, still holding Max close, his gaze never wavering. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And while the biker might not have realized it yet, he was about to learn a very important lesson. Never mess with someone's dog, not when that someone is Jason Statham. This expanded version builds suspense and keeps the tone engaging while maintaining simplicity and a natural flow. Let me know if you'd like me to continue expanding the next parts. Jason stood there, holding Max tightly against his chest. The dog whimpered softly, his little body trembling from the shock of what had just happened. Jason's jaw was clenched so hard it looked like it might crack under the pressure. His eyes burned with a mix of fury and protectiveness that could have scared even the toughest person alive. But he didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch out, heavy and loaded, while everyone in the park held their breath. The biker who had kicked Max seemed to think this moment of quiet meant weakness. He smirked again, leaning back slightly as if he owned the whole world. "What's the matter, huh?" he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "You got something to say, pretty boy?" Pretty boy. That was a mistake, a big one. Jason wasn't the kind of guy who threw punches without thinking, or at least, not anymore. Years of martial arts training and discipline had taught him how to channel his anger into precision. And right now, every ounce of his focus was locked onto this man standing in front of him. This man who thought kicking a defenseless animal was funny. This man who clearly had no idea who he was dealing with. "You really want to know what I have to say?" Jason finally spoke, his voice low and steady, but laced with venom. Each word landed like a punch. "I'll tell you exactly what I think of scum like you." Before the biker could respond, Jason moved. Faster than anyone expected, he closed the gap between them in 2 quick strides. Before the man realized what was happening, Jason grabbed him by the collar of his leather vest and yanked him forward. The biker stumbled, caught completely off guard. 1 second he was smirking and feeling untouchable. The next he was staring straight into Jason's face, which was colder than ice. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jason growled, his voice rising just enough to make sure everyone heard him. You get your kicks hurting animals? Is that what makes you feel tough? Kicking something that can't fight back? The biker tried to squirm free, but Jason's grip was ironclad. He was stronger than he looked, and his calm demeanor made him seem almost unstoppable. The biker's friends were still laughing, until they saw the look in Jason's eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was pure, unfiltered determination. They stopped mid-chuckle, suddenly unsure of themselves. "Let go of me," the biker spat, struggling harder now. But Jason didn't budge. Instead, he tightened his hold, pulling the man closer until their faces were inches apart. "No," Jason said simply. His tone left no room for argument. "Not until you understand something. You don't touch my dog. You don't hurt innocent creatures, and you sure as hell don't act like a coward in front of me." By now, a small crowd had gathered around them. Some people clutched their phones, ready to record whatever happened next. Others whispered nervously, torn between fear and fascination. No one dared to intervene, not when Jason Statham was involved. The biker mustered up some bravado, glaring at Jason through narrowed eyes. "You don't know who you're messing with," he snarled, trying to sound threatening. "We run this town." Jason didn't flinch. If anything, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in a sly, almost amused smirk. "No," he replied coolly. "You don't." And then, without warning, Jason released the biker, but only for a split second. As soon as the man staggered backward, regaining his balance, Jason turned his attention to the rest of the gang. He scanned their faces, meeting each pair of eyes with a steely gaze. "And you lot," he said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Are any of you actually proud of yourselves? Standing here cheering while your so-called leader beats up a helpless dog? Real tough guys, aren't you?" His words hit home. Several of the bikers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. A couple of them glanced at each other, silently debating whether to step in or stay out of it. None of them wanted to admit it, but deep down, they knew Jason was right. What they'd done wasn't brave. It was pathetic, but the leader wasn't ready to back down yet. Embarrassed and humiliated, he lunged at Jason, throwing a wild punch meant to knock him off his feet. It was a reckless move, fueled by ego and desperation, and it was exactly what Jason had been waiting for. With lightning-fast reflexes, Jason dodged the punch effortlessly. He sidestepped, letting the biker stumble past him, and then countered with a sharp strike to the man's stomach. The blow landed with a dull thud, knocking the wind out of him. The biker doubled over, gasping for air, but Jason wasn't done. In one fluid motion, he followed up with an elbow to the jaw, sending the man crashing to the ground. The entire park went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. For a moment, all anyone could hear was the sound of the fallen biker groaning in pain. This expanded version dives deeper into Jason's emotions and the dynamics between him and the bikers, keeping the tension high and the narrative engaging. Let me know if you'd like to continue expanding the next parts. The biker lay sprawled on the ground, clutching his jaw and groaning in pain. His once smug expression was gone, replaced by a mix of shock and humiliation. Jason stood over him, breathing steadily, his body coiled like a spring, ready for whatever came next. But he didn't move. He didn't gloat or taunt. Instead, he just watched, his sharp eyes scanning the rest of the gang. The other bikers froze, unsure of what to do. A few seconds ago, they'd been laughing and cheering, egging their leader on like it was all some big joke. Now they weren't so sure. One of them took a hesitant step forward, cracking his knuckles as if to signal he was ready to fight. Another glanced at his fallen leader, then back at Jason, clearly torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Jason noticed their hesitation. He straightened up slightly, adjusting his stance but keeping his guard up. His voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Anyone else feeling brave?" he asked, his tone calm but laced with warning. "Or are you done playing tough guys for today?" The question hung in the air unanswered. No one spoke. Even the birds had gone quiet, as if the whole park was holding its breath. It was clear now that these bikers weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who knew how to handle himself. One of the younger members of the gang finally broke the silence. "Man, this ain't worth it," he muttered under his breath, taking a cautious step back. His words seemed to loosen the knot of indecision among the others. Another biker nodded slowly, backing away toward their motorcycles. They exchanged nervous glances, silently agreeing that maybe picking a fight with Jason Statham wasn't such a great idea after all. But pride is a stubborn thing. And the leader, still lying on the ground, wasn't about to let this go without a fight. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, wincing in pain but refusing to stay down. "You think you're hot stuff, huh?" He spat, glaring at Jason through gritted teeth. "Just wait till my boys finish with you." That was the cue the rest of the gang needed, or so they thought. Two of them charged forward, fists raised, yelling threats meant to sound intimidating. To anyone else it might have worked, but Jason wasn't just anyone. He shifted his weight slightly, preparing for the attack. When the first biker swung wildly at him, Jason ducked effortlessly, letting the punch sail harmlessly over his shoulder. Without missing a beat, he countered with a quick jab to the man's ribs, followed by a sharp uppercut that sent him stumbling backward. The second biker tried to tackle him from the side, but Jason sidestepped again, grabbing the man's arm and using his momentum against him. With a smooth twist, he flipped the biker onto the ground, leaving him dazed and winded. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. By the time it was over, both attackers were on the ground, groaning and clutching their injuries. The crowd watching nearby erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Some people clapped instinctively, while others simply stared, wide-eyed and speechless. The remaining bikers looked at each other, panic creeping into their expressions. Their bravado was crumbling fast. One of them actually dropped his cigarette and stepped on it nervously, as if trying to figure out how to escape without looking like a coward. Another mumbled something about calling it quits and started walking toward his bike, ignoring the protests of his fallen comrades. Even the leader, who had been so eager to start trouble, was starting to realize he'd bitten off more than he could chew. He struggled to his feet, swaying unsteadily, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "This ain't over," he growled, pointing a shaky finger at Jason. "You hear me? This ain't over." Jason didn't respond. He just stood there, perfectly still, his gaze unwavering. There was no need to say anything. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. As the bikers scrambled to collect themselves and mount their motorcycles, the roar of engines filled the air once more. But this time it wasn't the confident rumble of men looking for trouble. It was the panicked revving of cowards trying to flee. Within moments they were gone, speeding out of the parking lot and disappearing down the road. The park fell silent again, except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirp of birds returning to their perches. Jason exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave his body. He turned back to Max, who was still nestled safely in his arms, and gently stroked the dog's head. "You okay, buddy?" he whispered, his voice soft and reassuring. Max licked his hand in response, wagging, his tail weakly but happily. People began to approach cautiously, offering words of gratitude and admiration. "That was incredible," one woman said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I can't believe you did that." Another man patted Jason on the shoulder and said, "Thanks for standing up for him. Not many people would have done that." Jason nodded politely but kept his responses brief. He wasn't interested in praise or attention. All that mattered to him was making sure Max was safe, and teaching those bullies a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Jason knelt down beside Max again, checking him over carefully. The dog seemed shaken, but otherwise fine, though Jason made a mental note to take him to the vet later just to be sure. For now, he scooped Max back into his arms and started walking toward the edge of the park, where things felt a little calmer. Behind him, the crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with excitement over what they'd just witnessed. Someone pulled out their phone and began recording a video recap, already planning to share it online. Others lingered, talking animatedly about how Jason had taken down an entire gang of bikers single-handedly. Word spread quickly, turning the incident into the kind of story people would tell for years to come. But Jason didn't stick around to hear any of it. He had more important things to focus on, like getting Max home and making sure he was comfortable. As far as he was concerned, this was just another day of doing the right thing. Nothing special. Nothing extraordinary. Little did he know, however, that this moment would change more than just his afternoon. It would remind everyone who heard about it that courage isn't about size or strength. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And sometimes heroes don't wear capes, they walk their dogs in the park. This expanded version adds depth to the confrontation scene while maintaining suspense and engagement. Let me know if you'd like to continue, expanding the next parts. As the last of the motorcycles roared away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the faint smell of burnt rubber, Jason finally allowed himself to relax. His shoulders dropped slightly, and he took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline slowly fade from his system. But even as the immediate danger passed, the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. People around him were still buzzing with excitement, whispering to each other about how they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. Jason ignored them. All that mattered right now was Max. He crouched down on the grass, gently placing the dog on the ground so he could check him over more thoroughly. Max whimpered softly, his tail wagging weakly as if to reassure Jason that he was okay. Jason ran his hands carefully over the dog's body, feeling for any signs of serious injury. Thankfully, it seemed like Max had gotten away with nothing, more than a few bruises and a lot of shock. Still, Jason knew better than to take chances. "I'll get you checked out properly," he murmured, stroking Max's head soothingly. "Don't worry, buddy. You're safe now." The crowd hadn't dispersed entirely. Some people lingered nearby, hesitant to leave after witnessing such an intense scene. A young couple approached cautiously, the woman holding her phone in one hand and a leash in the other, her own dog peeking out nervously from behind her legs. "Excuse me," she said softly, clearly trying not to startle him. "Is your dog okay?" That was wow. Just wow. Jason looked up briefly, offering a small, polite smile. "He'll be fine," he replied simply. "Thanks for asking." He didn't elaborate or seek further conversation. Instead, he focused back on Max, making sure the dog felt secure and calm. But others weren't as willing to let the moment go unnoticed. One man stepped forward, clapping his hands together enthusiastically. "Man, that was insane," he exclaimed, grinning ear to ear. "You handled those guys like it was nothing. Seriously, you're a real-life action hero." Jason chuckled, dryly, shaking his head. "I'm no hero," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "They picked on someone who couldn't defend himself. That's all there is to it." His words struck a chord with the growing group of onlookers. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone else chimed in, saying, "Still, most people wouldn't have done what you did. You stood up when no one else would. That counts. For something." Jason didn't argue. He appreciated the sentiment, but he wasn't interested in being put on a pedestal. To him, this wasn't about bravery or heroics. It was about doing the right thing. If anything, he hoped the incident would remind others to speak up when they saw injustice, whether it involved animals, people, or anything else. As the minutes ticked by, the commotion began to die down. The park returned to its usual rhythm, with joggers resuming their runs and families reclaiming picnic tables. Life moved on, but the memory of what had happened here would stay etched in everyone's minds for a long time. Then came the sound of sirens. At first, Jason thought it might be unrelated, a traffic accident somewhere nearby or another routine call. But as the wailing grew louder and 2 police cars screeched into the parking lot, lights flashing, he realized someone must have called the authorities, probably one of the bystanders who'd been filming the whole thing. 2 officers stepped out of their vehicles, looking around cautiously as they assessed the situation. They spotted Jason almost immediately, the center of attention, surrounded by curious onlookers, and approached him with measured steps. Their expressions were neutral, professional, but there was a hint of curiosity in their eyes. After all, it wasn't every day they responded to reports involving Jason Statham. "Sir," one of the officers said, addressing him directly, "can we talk to you about what happened here?" Jason nodded, standing up straight. "Of course," he replied calmly. "Those bikers attacked my dog without provocation. I intervened to protect him. Ask anyone. They saw everything." The officer glanced at the crowd, which eagerly nodded in confirmation. Several people began recounting the story, talking over each other in their eagerness to share what they'd seen. Words like brave, amazing, and unbelievable floated through the air, painting a vivid picture of the confrontation. The second officer jotted notes on a pad while listening intently. Once the initial flurry of explanations died down, he turned back to Jason. "And where are the individuals involved now?" he asked. "They left," Jason said, gesturing vaguely toward the road. "Headed that way on their bikes. I doubt they'll stick around town once word gets out." The officers exchanged a glance, then radioed in the description of the bikers and their motorcycles. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. With luck, the gang would be tracked down before they caused trouble elsewhere. One of the officers knelt down to examine Max, who was sitting quietly beside Jason, his tail thumping lightly against the ground. "Doesn't look like he's hurt too badly," the officer observed, scratching Max behind the ears. "Still, you might want to get him checked out by a vet just to be safe." "I plan to," Jason confirmed. "Thanks." After a few more questions, the officers concluded their investigation and prepared to leave. Before they got into their cars, however, one of them paused and looked back at Jason. "For what it's worth," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "we appreciate what you did today. Not many folks would have stood up like that." Jason shrugged modestly. "Like I said, it was the right thing to do." With that, the officers drove off, leaving Jason alone with Max and a handful of lingering onlookers. As the reality of the situation settled in, Jason felt a mix of emotions: relief that Max was safe, frustration at the bikers' cruelty, and gratitude for the support of strangers who had backed him up during the confrontation. He glanced down at Max, who gazed up at him with trusting eyes. "Come on, buddy," Jason said softly, scooping the dog into his arms again. "Let's get you home." As they walked away from the park, Jason couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers following him. People pointed discreetly, some smiling, others nodding in admiration. He understood why. They'd just watched something unforgettable, but he didn't crave the attention. What mattered most was that Max was safe and justice would hopefully be served for the bikers' actions. Little did Jason know, though, that this incident was far from over. News of the showdown spread quickly, thanks to social media posts and videos uploaded by witnesses. By the end of the day, headlines across Los Angeles were buzzing with stories of how Jason Statham had taken on a gang of bikers to protect his beloved dog. And while fame wasn't something he sought, it became clear that this act of courage had touched hearts far beyond the park. For Jason, however, the day was simple. He'd defended his best friend. Nothing more, nothing less. This expanded version delves deeper into the aftermath of the confrontation, emphasizing human reactions and Jason's humility, while keeping the narrative engaging and grounded. Let me know if you'd like to continue expanding the next parts. By the time Jason reached home, the adrenaline had completely worn off. He set Max down gently on the couch, wrapping him in a soft blanket to keep him warm and comfortable. The dog looked up at him with big, soulful eyes, his tail wagging weakly, as if to say thank you. Jason knelt beside him, running his fingers through Max's fur one more time. "You rest now," he said softly. "We'll deal with everything else later." But everything else wasn't going to wait long. Within hours, news of what had happened at the park spread like wildfire. Videos taken by witnesses surfaced online showing every detail of the confrontation, from the biker's cruel kick to Jason's calm but fierce retaliation. Social media exploded with reactions. Comments poured in from people all over the world, praising Jason for standing up to bullies and protecting an innocent animal. Local news channels picked up the story too. Headlines screamed things like, Jason Statham takes down biker gang to save his dog, and real-life action hero defends helpless pet. Reporters camped outside his house, hoping to get an interview. Fans left messages of support on his social media profiles, calling him a role model and a true hero. At first, Jason tried to ignore it all. Fame was something he'd always been careful about, not because he disliked attention, but because he preferred staying grounded. To him, this was just another day where he did what needed to be done. But as the hours passed, it became clear that this incident had struck a chord deeper than he'd anticipated. People weren't just talking about him. They were talking about kindness, courage, and the importance of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Meanwhile, law enforcement wasted no time tracking down the bikers. Thanks to descriptions provided by witnesses and video evidence captured during the altercation, police identified the gang quickly. It turned out they had a history of trouble, previous arrests for vandalism, assault, and even animal cruelty. When officers raided their hideout late that night, they found them nursing their wounds while grumbling about the crazy guy in the park. The leader, the man who had kicked Max, was furious when cops showed up. "This ain't fair," he shouted as they cuffed him. "He started it. We didn't do nothing wrong." His protests fell on deaf ears. Animal cruelty laws were strict in California, and kicking a defenseless dog was enough to land him behind bars. Add to that the charges of disturbing the peace and resisting arrest, and the bikers were facing serious consequences. As they were hauled away, one of them muttered bitterly, "Shoulda known better than to mess with a movie star's dog." Back at the station, investigators reviewed the footage from the park. They noted how restrained Jason had been throughout the entire ordeal. Despite being outnumbered, he hadn't gone overboard or resorted to unnecessary violence. Every move he made was calculated, aimed at neutralizing the threat without causing permanent harm. Even seasoned officers admitted they were impressed. "If only everyone handled situations like this," one detective remarked, shaking his head. The next morning, Jason decided it was time to address the situation publicly. Ignoring it wouldn't make the attention go away, and he knew people deserved some closure. So he agreed to give a brief statement outside his home, flanked by Max, who was still recovering but looking much better. Standing on his front porch with cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward him, Jason spoke, plainly and honestly. "What happened yesterday shouldn't have happened," he began, his voice steady and measured. "No animal deserves to be treated the way that dog was treated. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just doing what anyone should do when they see something wrong. You speak up, you act, you protect." He paused, glancing down at Max, who sat quietly by his side. "Max is my family. He trusts me to keep him safe, and I take that responsibility seriously. Those guys made a choice to hurt him, and they need to face the consequences of their actions. That's all there is to it." The crowd of reporters erupted into applause, but Jason raised a hand to quiet them. "Let me be clear," he continued. "This isn't about me. It's about remembering that we all have a duty to look out for each other, whether it's a person, an animal, or anyone who can't defend themselves. If this story inspires even one person to step in when they see injustice, then maybe something good can come out of it." With that, he stepped back inside, closing the door firmly behind him. The message was short but powerful, leaving reporters scrambling to capture every word. Online, fans praised his humility and wisdom, sharing his words across platforms as a reminder of what really mattered. As for the bikers, their arrest marked the beginning of a reckoning. Facing jail time and hefty fines, they realized too late that their reckless behavior had finally caught up with them. In court, weeks later, the judge didn't mince words. "Your actions were not only cruel, but senseless," she declared sternly. "Animals rely on us to treat them with compassion. Instead, you chose to abuse your power. For that, you will pay the price." The leader received the harshest sentence, while the others got lighter penalties, but all of them were ordered to attend mandatory anger management classes and perform community service at local animal shelters. Some joked bitterly about having to clean kennels, but others took the punishment as a wake-up call. One biker in particular seemed genuinely remorseful, telling reporters afterward, "I never thought about how my actions affected anyone else. Maybe this is my chance to change." For Jason, hearing about their sentences brought a small measure of satisfaction, but not triumph. He didn't want revenge. He wanted accountability. More importantly, he hoped the incident would serve as a lesson, not just for the bikers but for everyone who heard the story. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. The media circus died down, and Jason went back to his routine, spending quiet afternoons with Max once again. But the impact of what had happened lingered. Animal shelters across Los Angeles reported a surge in donations, inspired by Jason's bravery. Strangers wrote heartfelt letters thanking him for reminding them why compassion matters. And kids, playing in parks, whispered excitedly about how their favorite action star had saved a dog from bullies. Through it all, Jason remained humble. To him, none of this was extraordinary. It was simply human. But deep down, he knew the ripple effects of standing up for what's right could last far longer than any headline. And so, as the sun set on another peaceful evening, Jason sat on his porch with Max curled up at his feet. Life felt good again. Simple. Quiet. Exactly the way it should be. This expanded version emphasizes the legal aftermath, Jason's public response, and the broader impact of the incident, keeping the tone relatable and engaging. Let me know if you'd like to continue expanding the final parts. Weeks passed since the incident at the park, and life began to settle into a rhythm once again. For Jason, things were quieter now. No more reporters camped outside his house. No more strangers stopping him on the street to thank him or ask for selfies. The media frenzy had died down, leaving behind only the occasional mention in interviews or articles about real-life heroes. But while the spotlight faded, the impact of what had happened lingered, not just for Jason, but for everyone involved. The bikers, locked away in their respective cells, found themselves facing an unexpected reckoning. Jail wasn't easy for any of them, especially men who prided themselves on being tough and untouchable. Stripped of their bikes, their freedom, and their swagger, they were forced to confront the reality of their choices. Some clung stubbornly to their old ways, blaming Jason or the system for their misfortune. Others, however, began to reflect on the chain of events that led them here, and why it mattered. One evening, during a group counseling session at the East County Jail, the leader of the gang sat slumped in his chair, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He hadn't spoken much since arriving, preferring to glare silently at anyone who dared look his way. But tonight, something shifted. The counselor, a soft-spoken woman with years of experience working with troubled individuals, posed a question that cut through his defenses. "Why do you think you're here?" she asked gently, her tone non-judgmental but firm. He hesitated, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. After a long pause, he muttered, "Because some rich movie star decided to play hero." The counselor nodded thoughtfully. "That's part of it," she admitted. "But let's dig deeper. Why do you think he stepped in? What was happening before he got involved?" For the first time, the man didn't have a quick answer. His usual bravado faltered as memories of that day surfaced. The kick he'd delivered to Max, the cheers of his friends, the rush of power he'd felt in that moment. And then, the sight of Jason Statham charging toward him, calm but unstoppable like a force of nature. I don't know," he finally admitted, his voice quieter than before. "I guess I thought it was funny. Kicking the dog, I mean. It didn't seem like a big deal." The room fell silent. Even the other inmates stopped fidgeting, their eyes fixed on him. The counselor leaned forward slightly. "Do you still think it's funny now?" He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "No," he said gruffly. "It ain't funny anymore." What followed was one of the most honest conversations the group had ever had. One by one, the bikers opened up about their lives, the anger, the emptiness, the need to prove themselves through intimidation and violence. They talked about how easy it was to dehumanize others, whether it was animals, strangers, or even each other, and they admitted, albeit reluctantly, that they'd never truly considered the consequences of their actions until now. For the leader, this process was particularly painful. He'd always seen himself as untouchable, someone who could take whatever he wanted without repercussions. But sitting there in that cold, sterile room, surrounded by people he'd once dismissed as weak, he realized how hollow his life had been. Hurting an innocent dog hadn't made him stronger. It had exposed just how broken he really was. Outside the jail walls, Jason continued his quiet existence, focused on healing and moving forward. Max, thankfully, recovered fully from the ordeal, bounding around the house with his usual energy. Still, Jason couldn't shake the memory of that afternoon. The fear in Max's eyes, the cruelty of the biker's actions, the senseless violence that seemed so unnecessary. It weighed on him, not because he doubted doing the right thing, but because it reminded him of how fragile peace could be. One evening, as he scrolled through social media, Jason stumbled across a post from a local animal shelter. They'd organized a fundraiser inspired by his story, calling it "Stand Up for the Voiceless." Donations had poured in from all over the country, enough to expand their facilities and rescue dozens of neglected animals. The post included photos of happy dogs and cats finding new homes, along with messages from donors thanking Jason for inspiring them to give back. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He didn't seek recognition, but seeing the tangible difference his actions had made filled him with a quiet pride. Maybe this was proof that good could come out of bad, that even in moments of darkness, there was always a chance to turn things around. Later that week, Jason attended a charity gala hosted by the same animal shelter. It was a glitzy event, complete with fancy dresses, suits, and speeches from celebrities and activists. Normally, Jason avoided such gatherings, preferring to stay out of the limelight. But this time, he made an exception. This cause mattered to him. When his turn came to speak, he stepped onto the stage, Max trotting happily beside him. The audience erupted into applause, but Jason held up a hand, signaling for silence. When the room quieted down, he began to talk, not about himself, but about the bigger picture. "There's a lot of ugliness in the world," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "People hurt each other, sometimes without even realizing it. Animals suffer because we forget they feel pain too. But every single one of us has the power to make a difference, even in small ways." He paused, glancing down at Max, who looked up at him with trusting eyes. "When I saw that man hurt my dog, I didn't think twice about stepping in. Not because I'm special, but because it was the right thing to do. And if we all committed to standing up when we see injustice, imagine how much better the world could be." His words resonated deeply, earning another round of applause. As he left the stage, several attendees approached him to express their gratitude. One elderly woman, tears streaming down her face, hugged him tightly. "You've given me hope," she whispered. "Thank you." By the end of the night, Jason felt lighter, as though carrying the weight of that day in the park had become a little easier. He knew the scars of that experience would never fully disappear, for him, for Max, or even for the bikers paying for their mistakes. But maybe that was okay. Scars weren't always bad. Sometimes, they were reminders of battles fought and lessons learned. As he drove home with Max curled up in the passenger seat, Jason reflected on everything that had happened. Life had thrown him a curveball, forcing him to step into the role of protector in a way he hadn't expected. But in doing so, it had shown him just how interconnected humanity truly was. Every action, no matter how small, had ripple effects that reached far beyond what anyone could predict. And as he pulled into his driveway, Max wagging his tail excitedly beside him, Jason knew one thing for certain: kindness mattered. Courage mattered. Standing up for what was right mattered. Because in the end, those were the moments that defined us, not fame, fortune, or accolades, but the choices we made when no one was watching. This expanded version delves into the emotional journeys of both the bikers and Jason, emphasizing themes of redemption, reflection, and the lasting impact of compassion. Let me know if you'd like to continue expanding the final part. Months rolled by, and the events at the park became a distant memory for most people. Life moved on, Kids went back to school, businesses opened and closed, and the city buzzed with its usual energy. But for Jason, the story wasn't something he tucked away neatly in the past. It lingered in subtle ways, shaping how he saw the world and reminding him of the power of small actions. Max, his loyal companion, seemed none the worse for wear. The scrappy little terrier was as playful and energetic as ever, bounding through their backyard like nothing had happened. To anyone else, it might have looked like just another day for man and dog. But Jason knew better. Every wag of Max's tail carried a deeper meaning now, a reminder of resilience, trust, and the bond they shared. That bond had been tested, but it had also grown stronger because of what they'd been through together. Jason couldn't help but think about the ripple effects of that afternoon in the park. He'd never intended to make headlines or inspire strangers, but somehow his decision to stand up for Max had sparked something bigger than himself. Animal shelters across Los Angeles reported record-breaking donations after the incident. Volunteers poured in, eager to help care for neglected animals. Even local schools started incorporating lessons about empathy and kindness into their curriculums, using Jason's story as an example of standing up for what's right. It wasn't just the big gestures that stuck with him. It was the smaller moments, too. Like when a young boy stopped him at the grocery store one day, clutching a stuffed dog in his arms. "Are you the guy who saved the dog?" the boy asked shyly, his eyes wide with admiration. Jason knelt down so they were eye level. "Yeah, I am," he replied with a warm smile. "But you know what? You can be a hero, too. All it takes is being kind and helping others when they need it." The boy beamed, nodding enthusiastically before running off to tell his mom. Watching him go, Jason felt a twinge of pride. Maybe this was the real legacy. Not fame or recognition, but planting seeds of compassion in the next generation. As for the bikers, their journey toward redemption continued behind bars. Some struggled more than others, resisting the idea of change even as they faced the consequences of their actions. But there were glimmers of hope. One of them, a younger member of the gang who'd always followed orders without question, began volunteering at the animal shelter as part of his community service requirement. At first, he was reluctant, grumbling under his breath as he cleaned cages and refilled water bowls. But over time, something shifted. He started paying attention to the animals, their personalities, their quirks, the way they responded to kindness. Slowly, he began forming connections with them. A timid gray cat would rub against his leg whenever he walked by. A golden retriever mix with sad eyes perked up whenever he entered her kennel. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, however small. One afternoon, as he sat cross-legged on the floor playing tug-of-war with a puppy, one of the shelter workers approached him. "You're good with them," she said, smiling. "Ever thought about working with animals full-time?" He blinked, surprised by the suggestion. "Me? Nah, I'm not cut out for stuff like this," she shrugged. "Why not?" "You've got patience, and the dogs love you. Sometimes all it takes is believing you're capable of more than you think." Her words stuck with him long after he left the shelter that day. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. One where he didn't rely on intimidation or cruelty to feel powerful. It was a scary thought, but also exciting. Change wasn't easy, but maybe it was worth it. Back in the outside world, Jason kept living his life with humility and purpose. He didn't seek out opportunities to be a hero. Instead, he focused on being present in the moment, whether it was taking Max for walks, supporting charities close to his heart, or simply lending a listening ear to someone in need. Fame had given him a platform, but he used it wisely, choosing to amplify voices and causes that mattered rather than drawing attention to himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jason sat on his porch with Max curled up at his feet. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. He leaned back in his chair, letting the peacefulness wash over him. "Life's funny, isn't it?" he said aloud, scratching Max behind the ears. "Sometimes it throws you into situations you don't expect, forces you to step up. And then just when you think it's over, you realize it's changed you, and maybe even the world around you. in ways you couldn't have imagined. Max tilted his head as if trying to understand. Jason chuckled softly. I guess what I'm saying is, we're all connected. What we do matters, even if we don't see it right away. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the simplicity of nature and the comfort of companionship, Jason felt content. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared entirely. They probably never would, but they no longer weighed him down. Instead, they served as reminders of lessons learned and battles fought, both big and small. And so, as night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Jason stayed rooted in the belief that kindness, courage, and compassion could shape the world in profound ways. Whether it was protecting a defenseless dog, inspiring strangers to act with empathy, or giving someone a second chance, every action mattered. Because in the end, it wasn't about being extraordinary, it was about being human. With Max snuggled close beside him, Jason let the silence speak for itself. Life was unpredictable, messy, and beautiful all at once, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. This final expanded version ties together the themes of the story: kindness, redemption, and the lasting impact of our choices, while keeping the tone reflective and heartfelt. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments.